Thank you for joining us at Design Talks Now, the virtual version of Design Talks hosted by Design Pavilion in celebration of NYC by Design. I'm Eileen Shaw, producer of the Design Pavilion, New York's premier public design exhibition held through the public plazas of Times Square. Although our event is postponed, we're here now with a daily curation of design talks to keep the conversations alive. At a time when content and sharing have become a necessity to our professional and private lives, we are honored to share programming developed with our prestigious partners. Our series explores topics pointing to the future, resiliency, sustainability, and humanity as touched by design. And of course, we'll talk about our current circumstances. This programming documents a segment of thought and experience at a time when the world has changed. You are contributing to this time capsule, as well as inspiring what comes next. We're very pleased to present our partner, Rhode Island School of Design's President, Roseanne Summerson, moderating a conversation on shifting art and design practices during time of crisis, with RISD alumni Misha Khan, Susan Sellers, and Tavares Strawn. So now, let's begin.
Hello, everyone. Greetings. I'm Roseanne Summerson, president of RISD. I'm excited to host this Design Pavilion panel today on shifting art and design practices due to COVID-19. And joining me are three wonderful RISD alumni, Manhattan and Nassau-based contemporary artist Tavares Strawn, graphic designer Susan Sellers, a founding partner and creative director of the New York-based global design consultancy 2x4, and Brooklyn-based furniture artist and designer Misha Khan. Thank you all for being here today. It goes without saying that this is a moment unlike any other. At RISD, as it has in every major campus across the world, COVID-19 upended the last half of our semester, resulting in our having to relocate nearly all of our students in a matter of days, protect the work they left behind, and redirect all of our faculty to take on the task of remote teaching. And we are still determining what is next as health conditions continue to evolve. We are navigating a kind of uncertainty no one would have believed possible just a few months ago, and that requires enormous resilience and creativity. Though students in particular have felt tremendous anxiety as their expectations and worlds altered dramatically and without notice, there have been aspects of this tumult in the past few weeks that are profoundly encouraging. When faced with one's whole world turned upside down, the essence of what truly matters rises to the top. Creativity, adaptability, and resourcefulness present remarkable and unexpected ways to accomplish what is most important. Every organization is articulating a kind of clarity and commitment that validates who they are and what they want or even need to achieve. And this pandemic has also made evident many injustices. Like so many others, I see this pandemic shutdown as offering societies across the globe the potential for a giant reset to reconsider their values and needs and to prepare to move ahead and develop a more just and sustainable way of living together on the planet. As educators looking toward the development of the next generation of future creative leaders, it's incumbent upon us to focus on the opportunities this pandemic has revealed rather than fixate on the very real and daunting challenges it poses. And who better to talk about a vision for future than artists and designers? I believe no one navigates difficult situations and uncertainty better than creative talents because conceiving ideas or things that have never existed is essential not just to their practice, but to their lives. So I hope today's discussion can be a help and inspiration to others, whether they are artists or designers or not. Let me start by telling you a little bit about our panel, whose RISD educations span, believe it or not, 4 decades, and I'll let you figure out in what order. Susan Sellers is a founding partner and executive creative director of 2x4 and senior design critic at Yale School of Art. At 2x4, she leads projects across cultural and commercial sectors, from brand strategy and identity to brand experience programs and exhibitions. Clients include Samsung, Hyundai, Google, the Lincoln Center, Fondazione Prada, Guggenheim, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. And Susan also served as the head of design at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and is on the board of Triple Canopy. She's taught and lectured widely and holds a BFA in graphic design from RISD and an MA in American Studies from Yale. Tavares Strawn's artistic practice activates the intersections of art, science, and politics, offering us uniquely synthesized points of view on the cultural dynamics of scientific knowledge. He's perhaps best known for the distance between what we have and what we want, also known as the Arctic Ice Project, in which he extracted a 4.5-ton block of Arctic ice and shipped it to his birthplace in the Bahamas for children there to experience, where it was exhibited in a specially designed solar-powered freezer chamber. The work plays with the notions of displacement and interdependency, which are central both to the ecological systems which maintain the equatorial and Arctic environments, as well as the cultural realities which define themselves in relation to these environments, and I think have a particular resonance with what we're experiencing now. Tavares was recently an artist in residence at the Getty Research Institute and at the Allen Institute, and has been the recipient of many grants, including the LACMA Art and Technology Lab Artist Grant. Through that collaboration, he's been working on a project with SpaceX to celebrate the forgotten story of Robert Henry Lawrence Jr., the first African-American astronaut selected for any national space program. Tavares is a RISD Glass alum and also serves on the RISD Board of Trustees. And our third panelist, Misha Khan, was born in Duluth, Minnesota, where he's actually staying now during the pandemic. Misha received his BFA in furniture design from RISD in 2011. Misha's work exists at the intersection of design and sculpture, exploring a wide variety of media and scales from mouse to house. Misha's approach melds an array of processes from casting, carving, welding, and weaving to imaginative, collaborative, and singular modes of production. Misha's work has been exhibited internationally and is in the permanent collection of numerous museums and collections, including the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, the Dallas Museum of Art, and the Corning Museum of Glass. So with this extraordinary group of panelists, I'm excited to get into our discussion. And I'd like to start, Tavares, with you because I want to know, my first question is really just how are you doing and how are you feeling? And Tavares, I know this has been a particularly hard year for you as your family and friends in Nassau are still recovering from the effects of Hurricane Dorian. So how are you doing?
Thanks for asking, and it's a pleasure to be here. I think that's a wonderful question, simply because I feel like there are these moments during 2020 and actually in 2019 where levels of chaos and catastrophe were starting to overlap, and we're seeing that this year. In the Bahamas, the PM fortunately is a doctor, and so the lockdown so far there has been quite effective, and I think there are about 8 cases or so at this point, recorded cases or so at this point. And so I think that's doing well. I think the recovery effort from the hurricane has been slowed, obviously, by the pandemic. And so, the islands affected by the pandemic and the storm are getting a double whammy at the moment. But I think people are doing their best and they're coping. And I think the good news is that like I said, the authorities on the ground there have been doing a really wonderful job of keeping everyone safe.
So how are things in Duluth with you, Misha?
it feels like a crazy experience. I obviously had a show that just opened maybe a week before the shutdown, which in a way was like a best case scenario. Uh, and then in another way, the sort of usual post show, postpartum, like, oh, like where do I start making things again, and where do I jump in? Obviously, it gets kind of extra confounded.
Yeah. So Susan, I'm just wondering if you could tell us how you're doing.
I'm well. I'm healthy. I'm working. My team is safe, and they're all, in places that feel comfortable them, and they're healthy and well. So I feel really positive.
Terrific. Misha, how has it been having this major exhibit, which stalled after a week? How have you been able to showcase the work that is in the gallery, and how are you finding the response to the work at this particular time?
Um, it's interesting. I feel like it's like there's a lot of lessons hiding in there. I think I feel like with this show, I really actively made the pieces and the space to not be photogenic. I was feeling like a big kind of response to Instagram in the sense that work should be really photo friendly and digital, and I feel like I was trying to push against that, which obviously now in retrospect wasn't very useful. So I did kind of take lots of videos of the space, and eventually sort of shared pictures of all of it for people who weren't able to see it in person.
And Tavares, you have some major projects going on. Can you talk a little bit about the timing of this in terms of your own studio practice?
Yeah, I think it's actually an interesting set of circumstances for artists. Artists generally have and designers and creative folk across the board. There are philosophies that you have that underwrite what you're doing and thinking and your motivations for making. And I think all of those motivations are being challenged at a fundamental level. And I've been thinking a lot about that, specifically because your actions kind of speak louder than the rhetoric. And so if you fundamentally believe in what you're doing, and your work is underwritten by this kind of conviction, then there's nothing like a pandemic to really challenge that kind of core essence. As far as the practical, I haven't really been at the studio just because I'm at the moment in New York, and New York is under a pretty strict lockdown because New York is more or less leading in this pandemic in terms of casualties. So that's been really tough. I think the hardest part of it was kind of readjusting to it. And one of the great fortunes is I was on a phone conversation with David Ajay the architect David Ajay a few days ago. And one of the things we were talking about is the illusion of architecture, and how that when you're a maker, a huge part of making is not necessarily relying upon architecture or space, for example. And how do you get into a framework where you're kind of constructing and making and being constructive with the recognition that architecture, in some sense, is an illusion based. Or a gallery, for example, all the white walls inside of a gallery are they're not really there fundamentally. Museums and galleries move those walls around all the time. So how are you able to produce and think through ideas without worrying about the physicality in some sense? So building up that rhythm again has been hard. Developing that rhythm again, dealing with the uncertainty, dealing with the kind of unstable ground. All those things have been pretty hefty challenges. And I honestly, at this current moment, besides the fact that I'm continuing to try to make things, it's still up to, even to this day, it's been relatively difficult.
Can you expand a little bit on what you mean about your convictions, really coming to terms with your convictions at this point in time? Elaborate on what you mean by that, please.
Yeah. There's a phenomenal neon work by Bruce Nauman. And I think it goes something like this. A true artist reveals mystic truths. And I really love that work. and that piece, simply because if you're revealing something fundamental about the world and through your creative process, which I think in some sense all of us are, then we must continue to do that, and we must continue to do that under duress. And so that kind of the proof is in the pudding mentality is where I'm at the moment, and kind of questioning my motivations, and questioning, what my process is when I wasn't under when we weren't under this kind of duress, and have they changed any, right, fundamentally since the pandemic.
Yeah. And I'm curious to know, I want to ask in a minute about the people that work with you and how they're doing, your colleagues. I'll just switch over to Misha for a second. Misha, I know that a lot of artists and designers are coming to terms with new tools that have been introduced because of the fact that they're working much more intimately with technology than perhaps some of them do. I mean, many artists do work very intimately with technology, but I know that in your work, you actually came from a background that was really three-dimensionally rich, really the world of making. And your process now for developing new ideas is actually happening a lot sketching in virtual reality, so that you're actually sketching in a virtual world and then bringing those ideas out into the physical world. Could you talk a little bit about that process, and if any of that has evolved through this time of increased technology use?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still so codependent, and I feel like I think the best when I'm making something physically, and the kind of satisfaction of working on actual materials um, is there. But yeah, I did start a while ago kind of drawing a lot in virtual reality, which is really free and helpful. And some of it did come out of had started traveling a lot for work, and it was just like a way to, rather than bringing clay and a ton of sketchbooks with me, it was just so much easier. Um, and I was also kind of envious of all the writers in my life who just pack their laptop and go, and it just feels like wherever they are, they can do their work. And obviously, making 3D things, you never have that luxury. Um, and this time has been, I would never let myself in studio spend 8 hours with goggles on, just sort of sitting there pawing into the air. So it's been kind of fun to have an intense amount of time to really feel like native with the software,
Mhm.
even though I think it's a video game for kids. So it still feels like not work.
Well, the work that's been coming out of it has been really exceptional. Susan, let me just ask you how you're doing. I know that you've been kind of transposed for a number of weeks, and yet you have a very busy practice going on. How's it going for you?
Yeah, it's been really challenging, but it's also been, I have to say, really encouraging. As you know, we have a very large team of designers, and everyone has kind of scattered all over the country, and we are in Block Island, Rhode Island, and so it's been challenging. It's been sometimes very sad, I have to say. We've had a number of very close collaborators get sick and pass away, so that's been really difficult. But it's a time that's really going to change everyone. What it really will do is really just make us reassess our values and really prioritize, what we want to do, how we want to be in the world. Um, and I think that's it. That's one of the most important things. And so it might be about having a more sustainable practice, or really doing the work that you care most about. Um, I think that's really what's essential.
There are lots of choices that you make that are just because you're doing other things as your focus, and that a lot of people have been turning back to the sort of intimate focus, and seeing how they want to devise that moving forward, which is such a reflection time for everyone who is in a fortunate enough position to have a stable home and way to do that. I'm curious that all three of you work with a number of other people to carry out your work. Tavares, could you talk about how your able to navigate that right now with everyone in these sort of different levels of lockdown across the globe? How are you coordinating your partnerships to keep your work moving forward?
Yeah, I think what makes that question in a way easy is that we're all, for the most part, dealing with the same thing at the same time. And so I think we have a semi measured level of expectation from the people that I'm working with in the studio, my team, to the partners that we're collaborating with internationally. I think there's a sense that we all know that we're all on unstable ground. And I think it's gonna be interesting to see how things shape out in the future because we will have adapted and figured out how to work in a kind of hostile and kind of shaky situation. We've been in contact daily. Just recently we've started to kind of go into the studio but separately. So everyone would go on a separate day. That's been a kind of strategy that we're kind of playing around with. I think materiality at some point is what most of us are longing for, and the irony is we're kind of all trapped on in this kind of digital realm. And so the struggle for me and the team and everyone else that I'm working with is, we're telling stories through materiality. And so what happens when you don't have access to that materiality? How does it change? How does it change the role of materiality, and what is the function of a drawing? If in effect, maybe most of the drawings you're making or the plans you're making, we don't know, may or may not come to fruition.
Yeah. Misha, in your most recent show, there was an incredible body of new work, and you mentioned the fact that it's work that you wanted people to experience in person. Another recent show that you did, you actually made works that you wanted people to physically engage with, to actually touch and, with their whole bodies, not just, they were almost environments to absorb the body. How are you conceiving right now your creative practice moving forward in this sense of isolation where you just don't have access to those tools or those methodologies? Is that influencing the way you're thinking about new work?
Yeah, I think it's obviously both of those shows are like intensely unsuited for what's happened. So the museum show where people could kind of put their faces inside of these balloons that were squishing everyone, and it felt like a very communal shared space, was supposed to travel to the High Museum, and then obviously there's no way to do a show like that anymore. And initially I wanted it to be, there was like things people were going to put their mouths on, like it was unfriendly for a virus, or friendly for the virus, I suppose. But so now going forward, it's kind of been funny having like just such a clean break, which sometimes creatively I think I've craved, to sort of have an opportunity to just completely overhaul everything for no reason. And so I've definitely been thinking about pieces that are just coming from a totally other direction. And I feel like normally there's such a demand to kind of continue a trajectory with commissions and projects that are constantly happening, that you kind of never get to sort of like take the train on a sharp left turn. Mm-hmm. So I feel like I've been focusing on that.
I'm very interested about how artists and designers design from adversity, because adversity can be a real point of departure. And all three of you are extremely successful in your practice, but the way that you practice has really been challenged, so that there are opportunities, as you said, Misha, to discover new ways of working that come out of this moment. And I'm really curious to hear, Susan, in your practice, you have so many people that you're collaborating with around the globe, and so many major companies that you're working with that have their own hierarchies and expectations. Are you finding some sort of insight that this moment is providing that's helping you to direct with your clients other ways that they can get deeper into the core of what they're trying to accomplish?
Well, it's a really great point. I have to say that one of the interesting things about our client base is that almost all of our clients internationally are in Asia. or in Milan, in Italy. And so it was very interesting because, of course, this hit them before. And our office in Beijing, they just went back to work into a new studio that they had never actually inhabited, because it was just being renovated and just opened when the virus hit there. So I have to say, we've actually been learning a tremendous amount from our clients about how to work, how to be resilient in this environment, new ways of working. We were getting so many texts and so much input from them early on that we were a little bit, incredulous about how this was going to impact our lives in the studio. But they were really, very persistent in telling us that, things were going to change, and they were working differently. So I have to say that in many ways, we've become a lot more collaborative with our clients in doing a lot of individual research and sharing that research digitally, in having much more fluid, dynamic relationships in terms of authorship of our work. People are being very inventive, I think, about communicating their ideas and what they think they can contribute to a project. And so I think that that's been really inspiring. I think we've kind of exhausted this digital reality, and now we're very actively looking for other ways to, just work with our team, whether it's calling on the phone instead of, working via Zoom, or, just even that just is sometimes a little bit more intimate. So and we have a lot more experimentation to go, obviously, as we start to sort of re-enter our studios. How are we going to use those spaces? Do we workshop more there? Are we really physical, and are we making physical things, and are we using that more of a kind of meeting space, but everyone kind of goes off to their respective spaces and, kind of incubates things and then brings them to the table in the studio and goes back.
Tavares, your work has often involved communities of children or other individuals working to sort of make, in a way, to bring their own voices to make one voice. How are you juggling this sense of being very independent with your instinct of thinking about work as a voice for community?
Yeah, I think to me, I think that has to do with coming from a small community in the Caribbean, people who have been skeptical about systems, skeptical about institutions. In some cases, institutions have kind of more or less failed them, whether it's government, whether it's health, there are all these systems that were designed to serve the people and were not where I grew up. And so that shakiness, in some way, being raised in that kind of unstable on that unstable ground, in some ways is actually prepared me as an artist, a thinker, a maker. And I think that hopefully the ones of us that manage this the best are the ones that developed a kind of characteristic of I don't know if the right word is survival. I don't know if it's adaptability. I don't know if it's durability. And I think that's super important right now. And so that's kind of where I land on that one.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. It makes me wonder. We're talking in a sort of positive way about our adaptation to this moment. What really makes you angry, Misha? What are you angry about right now?
Yeah, I feel like there's the ability to adapt and to do so many things digitally, and seeing so many people around you kind of thrive in that, when it feels like all of your real tools have been taken away and you can't do that, is kind of infuriating every day, to just sort of feel crippled. Yeah, and also I think for me, like feeling like you've spent a lot of time like building up to something, and then you just it feels like it's kind of dissipated, like the uncertainty of when I'll be able to work or if, and what it looks like, and yeah, it feels very daunting. So I feel like everyone has the expectation that it's going to be somehow a creative time, and it's been sort of, that has been kind of infuriating for me, because it has been a difficult time to be creative, because the sort of end point of it is so murky. that what you kind of do with that energy is like,
Yeah, there's so much unknown.
I have to say, I have a little bit of the sense of Misha that everyone's kind of trying to get creative in this digital realm. They're, it's passing all types of content to one another. And I have to say, I feel a bit like my life is kind of continuing on in much the manner it same did, with the same workload, with all the same expectations, just through this one portal in front of this screen. And I just feel sensory deprivation. And I feel a frustration at being able to, as you say, like, touch the things that I work with, to physically put things together with content, to test ideas with people much more fluidly. I miss that. And I feel pretty determined that I'm not going to relinquish that. And then I also am just really frustrated by the din of kind of bad actors in the political landscape. And so that's just this constant kind of droning, aggravating presence that is also pretty frustrating.
Yeah, I think it's part and parcel of creative process for all of us. If I can speak for the group, I think one of the things, when you're being trained, one of the things you learn sort of is how to work in different circumstances with different materials, and work outside of your comfort zone. I think the hardest part of that was just adjusting to the reality that this was going to be like this for an unspecified amount of time. I think that was the hardest part. You always think about making things and this idea that you would make them if no one would ever see them, right? And I think this is that moment where you're making these things, and what about this possibility that they might never ever be seen, or be seen by a group of people? And I think that makes it makes the some of these conversations that are hyper philosophical and overly aestheticized, they get challenged in this moment in fundamental ways. Like, are you really going to make these things, even if they're drawings that no one's ever going to see or might ever see, right? So I think that's my point toward adaptability.
The public often expects artists and designers to be the storytellers, to be the articulate voices of things that perhaps they're experiencing but don't know how to express. And it is one of the roles of art, and certainly design. And I'm wondering, that sense of storytelling, which I think we're all doing in our practice, along with the notion of just not knowing where the story's going, like what chapter are we in, makes it really complicated. Susan, can you talk about that a little bit in your design process with your clients? There must be, I would imagine that typically you're given a kind of brief, but no one knows the end of where the brief is going. How are you adjusting for that in your current projects?
Well, that's a really good point. I mean, I have to say that at some level, the way that projects proceed, we're sort of finishing things that were underway. And I think that people feel, it's only now that people are starting to realize, like, oh, what is the value of this in a month, in a year, in 5 years, and so I feel like we're only starting to ask that question. I mean, we do a lot of different types of things. I think one, in terms of strategy, in terms of helping clients to shape their point of view and its relevance. Right now, we are really going back. We're rethinking about that and trying to anticipate, to some degree, what certain audiences and what certain publics are going to be receptive to or be interested in. And it's really hard to say what that is. Are people going to kind of entrench and kind of dig deeper into their kind of current value systems? Are they going to want to be more intimate, more in their more at home, or is it, when this is all over, like everyone outside, everyone together, everyone, and it's going to be like all about togetherness? So it's very hard to think about that for yourself. It's very much a little bit day by day, and maybe doing some testing around those ideas. I mean, there is a lot of digital opportunity for clients to sort of explore those things, but I think we're just really dipping our toe into that right now. I think there's been almost a delayed reaction on the part of clients in terms of how to shift, how to move.
Yeah, it's almost as if they have to be able to anticipate where we're going to know how to shift to that place. And Misha, in your work, you're always presenting a kind of alternate reality already. The pieces that you make define really different senses of scale and space and material and a very unique and independent aesthetic. How is that aesthetic being impacted by the way that we are globally changing, with everyone across the world experiencing this completely jarring, reality being thrown up in the air and not knowing where it's going to land?
I mean, I feel like it is fun. I feel like a while ago I was making these things that to me felt sort of like a vision for some kind of future objects after this dystopia that we were all kind of collectively visualizing. And then with sort of more recent work, I was kind of trying to change it to be very optimistic, like about how humans and technology could kind of be better collaborators to make a more human landscape. But in all of them, you imagine, at least for me, that so much of it feels like it's about collective use, like the idea of a lot of people being in a space and how it feels with other people. So I think for my sort of own whimsy, it's been more thinking about how objects just feel about themselves and trying to isolate them in like their world alone, so that it becomes less about that relationship and then um, more just about objects having their own ideas. And so that feels like my coping mechanism. And I think the big challenge that I feel is, at the same time as I think we're becoming more kind of reflective and having a little bit of a slower and more quiet life collectively, we're all looking at Instagram and everyone kind of wants content and digital images. And the visual language of those two things to me has always felt really opposite. On one hand, we want something really easy to understand in a picture and punchy, and then in the other, we want something that kind of is slow and meandering. So, and I don't have a solution for that yet.
Yeah, I think we're in a real transition time between the pace that we're used to and the pace that we're experiencing, and then where do we go with that? And Tavares, I want to switch a little bit to another topic with you, which is that so much of your work looks at the intersections between different kinds of knowledge, between science and technology and art and the space exploration. At this particular moment in time, there is a different ask of bringing bodies of knowledge together to solve these really global problems. Can you talk a little bit, as someone that's done that as an artist, where you've brought together different disciplines to come up with a singular concept? How do you see that perhaps informing us as we face this as a society?
Yeah, I think one of the unusual flaws of collaboration is that it's difficult, even in quote unquote normal circumstances, to manage and predict the use factor of time, right? And what I mean by that is, 6 weeks ago, we were all having a radically different conversation. And it seems like the conversation's changing every week as to what expectations might be. And we're all trying to predict that. I think that problem is always constant in collaboration, specifically within scientific and even artistic practice, right? And so managing the question of what is the world going to look like in December, for example. For example, 2 weeks ago, I wasn't looking as far as December. Now I'm looking as far as next summer, right? So what does next summer look like if it was to exist under these exact conditions? Which is not necessarily the most optimistic way of thinking about things, but that's kind of where I'm at. So I think watching the narrative unveil, and I think science has always kind of struggled with telling its own story. Traditionally, science has never really done a good job of being able to articulate to mass culture, and educating people about certain differences and certain nuances. So I think it's been interesting watching the collaborative conversations come together, the seriousness of certain entities, and how the narrative and the timeline shifting dramatically every week.
I think another as part of it too is where we have shared language, and so that the communication becomes clearer. And I'm curious, Susan, from in a different angle, kind of coming at the same question. You're really dealing with a lot of culture makers. You're dealing with a lot of fashion companies and companies that are very much about identity and brand, issues of really defining our cultures across the globe. Do you see this moment in time influencing how they will be interpreting what cultural ideation means moving forward?
Well, I think it's a great question. And I think that the onslaught of the virus really, like a light switch, sort of turned all of their traditional modes of communication off. And so I think that there was a real kind of shock of recognition in, for instance, the fashion industry, that this has been kind of creeping for a long time in terms of sustainability, in terms of just all the potential of, and I think a lot of, shifts and desires on the part of their consumers. People want them to be responsible to culture, to race and ethnicity, to equity, to sustainability. They want them to be, feel indebted to those conversations, trying to think differently about their production, trying to think about the kinds of sequences of production and design. That's actually absolutely at the center of what they do. And they need to be responsible to production methods, to sustainability, to the life cycle of their products. Different people are doing it in different ways. Different people have the means, or let's say the kind of authentic culture to really draw on to do that well.
Are there things specifically that you're learning that through the experience of this vast change in all of our lives, that will be positive takeaways that you want to be sure to focus on as you advance your work moving forward? Susan, you want to start?
Sure. I think for us, this has also jump-started a lot of things that we have wanted to do in terms of becoming more autonomous, becoming more sustainable, prioritizing our work, and just really reevaluating what's important to us. So I think it's really brought that to light for us. And I'm very grateful for that. And would really like to get back to our studio and just have a little bit more physical contact with people. But I think that's one of my biggest takeaways. I think it'll mean a significant change in how we work together and how we really prioritize our work.
How about you, Misha?
Well, I think one big takeaway for me is I feel like it was just sort of starting to get to the point where there'd be projects where I would have to just dash off a sketch in, 20, 30 minutes, and then it would get made. And there wasn't really the kind of time to think about every single thing to the level that I would want to. So some things would get that attention, but now obviously having just like so much time, so if I'm sketching something, it can just get reworked a million times, is kind of a nice luxury, and one that I don't want to give up completely. So I think just sort of seeing the benefits of scaling it down a little bit to not have it have to be as many things all the time. And I feel like I've gotten so much joy out of traveling to make things and being in other places to make things, but seeing the kind of benefits and kind of a want for producing things more locally for a lot of different reasons, but being able to have my hands in more things and sort of figuring out a way to do that feels really valuable. And the benefits of doing things in other places would kind of always outweigh that. And so now this feels like a big reset, and I'm hoping for a lot of different people, just producing things a little bit more locally will become relevant again.
Yeah, and that's certainly been a theme in the fashion industry already, starting to show the way that work is shown, the way that work is produced, this whole supply chain system for materials. The fashion industry has written a lot about that already, and I think many industries will be exploring that. I think seeing the maps of the planet with, animals coming back to the parks and skies visible affects all of us. What are some of the things, Tavares, that you think you're learning through this experience that you want to make sure you carry forward in your practice?
I think it's really basic for me. It's humility. I think this virus has brought all of us to our knees. And patience. We're not in control. We're not driving. We don't get to drive this car, right? And I think those are lessons, particularly for my younger artist self, that I would have need to have been reminded of, and even now today, is to remind myself that you know to be a little patient and to exercise a certain level of humility, and we're all kind of passengers on this spaceship.
Mhm. Yeah, and you sometimes literally on the spaceship. Um, you all have people that work for you, employees. How, as studio leads, have you dealt with the people that work with you or for you in your studios? Susan, do you want to start again?
Sure. Well, first of all, we very early on let everyone go where they needed to go and make the decision to work offsite. And so our studio really is located all over the country. Um, it's a really uncertain time, and there are layoffs and everywhere, and I think everyone has been very, very worried about that. And we've made the decision really to keep everyone together, take cuts across the studio, pay cuts across the studio, staggered pay cuts, and to really try to really weather this together. Um, And then I guess the last thing that's really important is we've just tried to be absolutely as transparent as possible, provide lots of opportunities for conversations with us directly, provide an online forum that's private, that if people have questions that they want to ask, but they don't want to be called out specifically, they can ask, and it will follow up directly to our group. So we've just been trying to provide a lot of opportunity for feedback, take it very seriously, take it slowly, and just be really respectful of everyone's individual responses to this situation. And I think that that's something that really was a big takeaway for me in the beginning, was just the many, many, many ways that people have responded to this crisis, and to just try to be absolutely supportive and open to that. And I think we've tried to just be kind of calming and steady and doing everything. I think there's also a thing about, getting back to your roots. I think Misha said this, and sort of working in ways that maybe we haven't for a long time, not being humble, doing every part of a project, not, taking it on and being responsible to it all, and filling in wherever we can, to just keep a kind of stable and calm environment to kind of weather what comes.
Yeah, thank you. Tavares, how are you managing the studio?
Yeah, it's I think it's all of the kind of fundamentals. You make sure that people are being compensated, paid, taken care of. That their mental health is more or less organized, and they have outlets for those kinds of issues that we're all struggling deeply with and about. I think the other part of it is that um, having a sense of humor about all of it. I think that's super important ingredient for all of this. After all of the basics are taken care of, we get on the Zoom chat and we joke for a half an hour about any number of subjects, and I think that's really, 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 really important. And so that's kind of how we've been coping with it.
Yeah, those are good lessons, I think, anytime to remember. Misha, how about you? How are you dealing with the people that work with you?
I'm probably like I feel like I'm the worst example. I just like obviously have a decent sized crew, and they're all sort of on a contract basis, and we just finished this huge show, and it's normally just like when you kind of recoup all of the money that you poured out. So I feel like I was just sort of in a bad situation to be able to, and I wish there was more work that people could do. So I've tried to have people do stuff digitally as much as possible and do things from away. But um, yeah, just sort of seeing other companies be able to kind of disperse things in a way that when everyone's used to making things and they can't make anything is tricky. So I'm trying to keep people busy in little ways and hoping that we can get back soon.
So one final question I'm going to ask all of you, and then I'm going to ask you if there's anything else you want to add in general. And the final question is, can you imagine what your sort of ideal post-COVID vision would be 5 years from now? Just an easy question.
Exactly. Vision for what exactly?
Yeah, so that, you know, having the kind of global experience of something that has affected all of us, every human being, and really every living thing on Earth. How would you imagine, in your view, if you could sort of design what things would look like 5 years from now with what you've learned through this last, 6 to 8 weeks of COVID, what would that look like, Susan?
Wow. Yeah. Well, that's obviously such a hard question. But I guess just in really general terms, I hope that it could be, for instance, more thoughtful, more intimate, more caring, more sustainable and healthy. But also, I guess there are things that I hope that continue on. Like, for instance, I miss place. So I still want to be here, still present, still physical, still together, still funny, still room for irreverence, and yeah, still here.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing you say is that a clear articulation of what already has driven you to do the work that you do. And I think many people are coming through this with clarity about what really matters to them. And I think it's a totally valid answer to say more of the same, but with a clearer focus. Tavares, how about you? What are your takeaways that would define your post-COVID world 5 years from now?
I think it's the fact that COVID is such a shared reality. It's the one kind of disaster that we're almost feeling evenly and equally. And I think in a lot of respects, it's brought about a strong sense of compassion. And I just, it's my dream that in 5 years that we are a more compassionate world. And I think the word compassion connects us to our geopolitics. It connects us to our climate issues and the environment. I think it connects to social justice issues. I think it connects to how we're thinking about youth and young people, and housing and all these issues. So I hope that I think we're in a moment now where people are generally listening to each other, and people are generally being a little bit more compassionate because of this COVID issue, and hopefully we can stay on that path.
Misha, your 5-year COVID takeaway vision.
Well, I hope that everyone keeps running and gardening, and I think that we'll work less. I feel like that's another takeaway, that we kind of needed less things and we don't need to do as many things. So I'm hoping that there's a lot more languid time, and I'm hoping it really helps with architecture a lot. I think people had gone way too far with open floor plans, and I think this is really gonna reel that into more of like a honeycomb type work and live situation, which I'm excited about because I think a lot of small rooms is more fun than one big room.
So articulation, compassion, one big room, and remembering what you like to do, those are all really good takeaways.
Roseanne, I have a question for you.
Okay.
How are the RISD students doing through all this?
It's very varied. For some of them, there have been incredible breakthroughs, and some of those things will manifest, I think, even more later. And for some of them, it's been really tough. I mean, I can't imagine doing my final work in my parents' living room as a RISD student. So we have a great amount of empathy for many of the hurdles of different time zones, of sharing technology with siblings, of having a lot of pivoting, thinking about what you're getting out of an expected project. But there have also been some remarkable breakthroughs and triumphs, and the learning that happens from the resilience that's necessary to carry out your particular artistic view under really difficult circumstances is something that I think will be of great benefit retrospectively. It's been tough, though. It's been very hard for a lot of them, and for faculty too, who have had to turn on a dime to reinvent their teaching practice. But it's been a remarkable story of resilience and commitment.
Yeah, Rosanna, it must be so challenging for you too, leading the ship there. It's a lot of voices, a lot of issues.
Yeah, well, I think that for all of us who are running any kind of institution or practice, the ability to make plans and yet stay open to dramatic and major change at every turn really challenges leadership in general. And it is something that I think, to the point that Misha was making about, thinking about how we map again to new spaces, to new activities, the idea of building flexibility into how we expect things to run, how we expect the world to be, is something that artists and designers in particular will need to bring to this moment, because I believe there's a lot of uncertainty ahead that needs the design of uncertainty built into practices and principles and systems. So hopefully we will emerge with some of that wisdom embedded further into our world cultures. Misha, anything else that you wanted to say?
No, I was liking that version of it. I feel like I just keep imagining objects that sort of keep folding down and turning into other things. Because yeah, it feels like the takeaway is that we just need to be able to transform things a little more gracefully.
Yeah, I got an email today, a really beautiful email from a colleague in China who ended the email by saying, "Remember, we're all dreaming under one sky." And I thought that maybe that's a nice way to end. So thank you all so much for participating in this. It's been wonderful, even with our technical glitches of the realities of working across many miles. I really appreciate your openness and your generosity, and I wish everyone a safe and healthy time moving forward. So thanks again.
Thank you, Roseanne, Misha, Susan, and Tavares for your heartfelt sharing. And thank you all for joining us. And please do so again at the next Design Talks Now. You'll find more information on topics and presenters on our new Design Pavilion website. So for now, stay safe, stay smart. Design stands together.